they don't have any more claim to the computer or to the table or to the bathroom, as the person who's the most down on their luck. And there's not a lot of places in our society where that's the case anymore.
Yeah.
And so in a way, the library is part of the reality principle that I think we all need to observe. It reminds us of what kind of world we've built. And I think it helps us to remember, what it means to try to organize a civil society where we all have a chance.
So I wanted to start with, in the process of putting this book together, what was most surprising as you sort of pulled together all of your research over the years and you were putting this language to it? What was most surprising or disarming?
Well, thank you for that. It's a nice introduction. And I want to say before we get into it that I'm really excited to be here. I've never been in this building before. Yeah. This is a gorgeous public space.
This is our agora.
It is like an agora. I'm a little blown away by just all of this. It's really extraordinary. Yeah. And I kind of want to just sneak off stage and go, snoop around, but I'm going to have to do that another time.
Wait, should we turn this into a Jane's Hall?
That would be fun. So I really am excited to have this day in Toronto. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. And, as to your question about the surprise, you're going to think I'm just kind of playing to the audience here, but the truth is, how there's people who grow up in libraries and they have these amazing library stories, and you ask tell me about the book that you associate with the library or a librarian or something you discovered there, and you find that people just have these amazing life stories. That anyone here have anyone here remember getting their first library card? I'm just curious. A lot of people are you associate some book with the library or something you discovered. Anyone have an experience like that? I have nothing like that in my memory. I was not that kid in any way at all. I grew up in Chicago in the 1970s and 1980s, and we had a kind of eviscerated public infrastructure. The city was broke. Everybody with money was leaving. Public institutions were in a horrible disarray, and so the library was not really a part of my life. And the idea for writing this book about social infrastructure really came, I think you hinted at it, because when I wrote my first book, this book about a heat wave disaster in Chicago, the thing I paid a lot of attention to is the way that the social infrastructure of neighborhoods shape people's capacity to live well or to survive really big catastrophic situations. So the kind of blockbuster finding in the book was that there are all these really poor and vulnerable neighborhoods in Chicago, and many kind of looked identical demographically, but it turned out that there were widely varying experiences that they had during this crisis, and the thing that really determined who would live and who would die was the quality of what I came to think of as social infrastructure, like the gathering places, physical places where people interact. And I decided to write a book about this idea, and really, at some point, I thought to myself, I have to have one big institution, one big place that's like the spine of the book that crystallizes what the best kind of social infrastructure looks like. And it was through a search for that I came to the library as that place, and I hadn't really expected it. So I wound up, spending pretty much every day for a year in different public libraries, not grand ones like this, but more like the kind of branch libraries, and honestly, the biggest surprise, and it was a revelation, is just how lively and dynamic and adaptive the library is as an institution, because I think I was like many of the people in the world who used to think of it as a somewhat antiquated institution, and it was this extraordinary discovery for me. So I know for some people who've been spending time in libraries a lot, that might not be the most exciting insight, but for me, it was extraordinary, and it led to kind of a sharpening of this language and argument about the value of not just places, but also public goods more generally.
Well, it did make me think about some of the, when some of my favorite people across the city started saying, have you read this book? Have you read this book? Have you read this book? I noticed what a diverse group it was. For the first time, it wasn't just the community development folk, it wasn't just the planners, it wasn't just the tech entrepreneurs, it was everyone saying, have you read this book? And what surprised me, or what I was intrigued by, was I was thinking about, this builds on conversations that have been happening in planning and community development, the Jacobsian mindset around eyes on the street. This sort of brings a lot of that together. And a lot of what you talk in the book about is still sort of capital P public institutions. So the library, the park, some of the publicly funded and governed spaces. Have you at all had interactions with community development folks or folks working at the grassroots level who are leading some of the infrastructure development? You talk a little bit about it around the Parks Project, but I was interested to hear about what the feedback you've been getting from the community development folks or the sort of non-capital I institutional folks.
Very, very much, and I would say, one of the fun things for me about the last year, but just so you know, the paperback of the book that they have over there, it literally came out yesterday. This is the first event I've done, so it's like I've been living with this book for a year now, but this is like the second, this kind of second round. So this is where we're launching the paperback to have these conversations, and it's been fun to see all the different kinds of actors and institutions that are interested. So that means everyone from like national governments that are thinking about, how do you do planning and society building and civil society rebuilding, thinking about social infrastructure as a critical kind of infrastructure, right? Like as significant as the infrastructure for transit or for communication. What happens to the way we think about planning if we do social infrastructure seriously? But also, neighborhood organizations or small businesses that are trying to think about, how they can create a gathering place. And so, I have had those conversations, and I think the concept lends itself to small-scale development. I was just reading an article about a group of young people in their 20s in Somerville, Massachusetts, who decided that they wanted to have a better gathering place in their neighborhood, and it wasn't being provided by local government, and so they wanted to start some kind of small organization that could be a hub where people could come together. And it's tricky when you do that with a business, because, and there was a really nice article in the Globe and Mail that kind of went over this a little bit today, but as wonderful as a coffee shop can be as social infrastructure, there's still a price of admission, right? You still have to have, I think I just paid $6 for this very delicious coffee in the library. And that's a lot of money for a cup of coffee. And there's some commercial sector, operators that want to be gathering places, but the way they signal to people outside the door who's welcome and who's not welcome, is pretty apparent, right? And of course, you probably read the story about the Starbucks in Philadelphia last year that didn't kick out two African American guys whose friend was late. They arrested them for sitting at the table for 10 minutes. And so, commercial and kind of nonprofits can work really well, but they have to be accessible. And so I think that's one reason why in the book, I love Jane Jacobs, and I don't want to say anything, critical about Jane Jacobs at all in this, city of adopted city of hers. And like
it's her city. It's
her city for sure. But I think like the difference between the kind of emphasis in my book and the emphasis in her great book is that I'm really trying to point to the role of the state and to this importance of the public sector for supporting gathering places and institutions. I unlike her, I have less confidence in the market to just deliver the things that we need. And I'm betting, I don't know if this is true, but I'm betting if she were around today and she could watch some of the things that have happened, like in her old neighborhood in New York, in Greenwich Village, where I live, that she would probably have a different view too.
Yeah, and that was actually going to be my next question. I think there's something about. So I'm always trying to look at these things with a scrutinizing lens, because I like you, am an evangelist for social infrastructure. I really do believe in it. I've been part of it. And I remember early in my career, one of the distinctions I made between the human right to housing, because I was working in the architecture and planning space, was that architecture is a human right, that beautiful, dignified space, not just any place to live, but a place that is dignified, is as much a human right as shelter is. And so that part of the thesis really resonated with me. The part that I want to resolve and understand is these social infrastructures that exist in our cities and in neighborhoods outside of the core, in the case of Toronto, largely got degraded because of state divestment, because of racism, because of white flight, because of all those different things. And so you touch on it a little bit in the book, in the example about the pools, and which was very vivid, and I appreciated that. But I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into that, your trust and faith in the state to not repeat some of the patterns that got us to this degradation of our social infrastructure in the first place.
So I don't think it's like a kind of blind trust and faith. It's more like
optimism.
The state. Well, it's more that I think the state is something that we as citizens can act on. Like we can make demands if we organize. For not just the construction of accessible spaces. I can't make that demand of the private sector. Like Starbucks doesn't care so much what I have to say about how they design their space or organize it, right? But I have the capacity, and we collectively have the capacity to make a claim on the state. So it feels to me like it's available as the target for civic action in a way that the private sector is not, and it also has resources. And it's now, our governments are using their resources in ways that I don't really support. Subsidizing fossil fuel industry, for instance, but other things as well. In my country, the big issue is the military, and giving back money to very wealthy people. So it feels to me like it's important to kind of call out the state for what it can do, and also to organize on it. But I want to say one thing. And this is really crucial. It's not just about building and designing things that are beautiful and work well, although I share your view that those things are important. One thing that's really important, and I think that we don't talk about enough, is the importance of maintenance. Talk about boring, but talk about significant. I mean, what does it mean to maintain a public park or to maintain a library? So you keep it up well. And I say this as someone like who again, I grew up in a deindustrializing American city that was once extraordinarily prosperous, that fell apart and that managed to revive itself, through in some way kind of rebuilding public infrastructure. But maintenance is crucial. And it's not sexy to talk about maintenance. It's very sexy to talk about, design. But maintenance, and then also, and I think this is especially important to talk about in the context of the library or a swimming pool, programming. Right? And programming means the design of activities, and it also means human resources. It means human staff. It means jobs, people. And so while we're all sitting together, gathered in the library today, let's all pay attention to this incredible design, but let's also look around at the librarians who are here, not getting especially wealthy, I think. Right?
It's super different in Toronto.
To do it, you do have very wealthy libraries. They're like bankers in New York City, I heard.
Basically.
So I'm just thinking about like the HBO television show about like the cabal of librarians who are running Toronto. But the value of librarians to program a place, to make decisions about who's welcome and who's not welcome, if anyone is not welcome, or to provide help and guidance, to do programs that keep people stimulated. So a lot of my field work for this book took place in these neighborhoods in New York City that are incredibly diverse, but that have a lot of ethnic and linguistic segmentation, or class segmentation once you get inside of it. So if you have librarians who specialize in working with young people and their families and are committed to making the story time multilingual. So you go to story time in the morning, and we're talking about kids who are 2, 3, 4 years old, and you tell the story, in English, but also in Mandarin and also in Spanish. That changes the room. Now you're creating an opportunity for people to come together who might not come together just on the playground. And I can't tell you how many relationships I saw develop, because two caretakers share a smile because their kids do something cute, and then that turns into a play date, which then turns into something else, and those relationships are really important. Or you talked about human dignity. Well, so I think, one of the debates that comes up often in cities where I give talks is, what happens now that the library has become this kind of place of last resort, because we have so many holes in the safety net. That people who are homeless or who suffer from substance abuse problems or are unemployed or have struggle with mental illness, come to the library as a safe haven. And how does that change the dynamic? And I think, first of all, those are also people, and they deserve a place too, right? And we haven't exactly built cities in the private sector to accommodate them. But also, it's not the building, it's not only the building that conveys that sense of dignity to someone who's down on their luck, it's also the librarian who maintains the dignity of that person by smiling and interacting with them and treating them as just as much a human being with just as much a right to the table as everyone else. And that was an amazing thing that I experienced so many times going to branch libraries in New York City, where there are kind of high-end professionals who use it as a free WeWork space,
Yeah. There's a few of them here right now.
And they don't have any more claim to the computer or to the table or to the bathroom, as the person who's the most down on their luck. And there's not a lot of places in our society where that's the case anymore. And so in a way, the library is part of the reality principle that I think we all need to observe. It reminds us of what kind of world we've built. And I think it helps us to remember what it means to try to organize a civil society where we all have a chance.
Yeah, it has been part of the discussion around this book. You talked about social capital in the book, and to me what you're talking about is part of that, is the programming sort of feeds our social capital and feeds our capacity to develop it. Someone asked me a question this morning about the degree to which we think that modernism notoriously failed because people vote with their feet, and these spaces, though beautiful, didn't elicit a sense of belonging for folks. And so there was a level of sort of of nudging that needed to happen to signal to people that they could appropriate the space as theirs. One of the things, so I'm fully with you on programming. The other thing that I love, and because I identify as an introvert, I really loved the part.
You're an introvert?
I'm an introvert.
There's not a single person in this room who thinks you're an introvert.
I know that. It's I'm working on communicating with more precision like you. But one of the things that I was really struck by in the book, or it reminded me of, was that the thing I love about the library is that I can have unprogrammed, ungoverned time with people. I have a degree of autonomy in terms of choosing how and where to direct my energy, and I can do nothing around everyone else. And so I think for me there's an interesting dynamic about the library, which is, and the other part of it was that I loved the question, librarians don't ask you why are you doing that? Right? There's no judgment in your choices. And so to me, I'm interested in exploring with you sort of the dynamic between, I do think the programming is really important, days like today that bring us together. I also think that it liberates us from coming together with people for only a program. And that's part of what I found so interesting.
That's right. I think part of the program of the library is the openness to discover, right? I mean, it's that there are all these different places that you can go, and that the library staff, and again, I don't know the Toronto situation or the Canadian library world as well as I know the American or the US library world. This kind of respect for the dignity of persons, which includes, commitment to non-surveillance, commitment to privacy. You're, I think, invoking a conversation I had with, there's a character in the book, a woman named Sharon, who told me about in our interview, her experience kind of growing up in the library. Her parents did expect her to go spend her afternoons in the library. And she said one of the things that was really remarkable about her, she was quite precocious. She wound up becoming the dean of the humanities at Columbia University. So she, a real reader. But the librarians never judged her. When she would ask, how do I find films from the 1930s? No one ever asked her, why do you want to know that? It was just, how can I help you? And that was a remarkable thing. And there's something else that she said, and some of the other people I interviewed said for this book, and that is that, remember I asked you a few minutes ago, how many of you remember getting your first library card? the thing about a library, getting this card as a young person, and I got to see a lot of young people getting their first library cards. In fact, I did a photo essay with this incredible photographer named Joey O'Loughlin that was in Slate. And you should look at it if you haven't seen those photographs, because there's some photos of kids getting their library cards for the first time. But one of the things that's so extraordinary about that moment is, for many of us, it's the first time that that's first of all that we are recognized as individuals, kind of with our own capacity to make choices, and to program ourselves, by figuring out what we want to read or watch. So when you get that library card, you're being kind of officially acknowledged by the government and by society in some way, and that's an amazing thing. But you're also getting incorporated into our ideas about what it means to be in civil society, what it means to be in a community, to use a kind of fuzzy and vague word, because you go and explore and you pick, the first Harry Potter book, and you start to read it, but you learn also that, you have to return the Harry Potter book in a few weeks. You should take good care of it, because there's another girl who's waiting to get the copy of Harry Potter when you're finished with it, right? So you feel the sense of both the generosity that we as society are capable of, but also the obligation, responsibility that comes with that. And then you also have a self-interest, because you get like halfway through Harry Potter and you can't wait for the second book. And you know that your only chance of getting access to the second book of Harry Potter is if the girl who's got Harry Potter now returns it on time as well. So there's a way in which that kind of individual programming leads us into this path towards recognizing ourselves as members of something larger than our own private lives. And I just can't think of a place in our world today that does that better than the library. And so when I wrote that article in the New York Times that was about, if we want to restore democracy, start with the library. That was really the spirit of this, that we are really in a crisis of democracy. It's not just true in the United States, it's true globally. We have a crisis of democracy. Things that we took for granted, I think, until just a few years ago, are suddenly up for grabs. And we're seeing the kind of rise of authoritarianism all over the place. And so for me, it's not that I'm so glib as to think that if we just build more libraries, if we just design them better, that we're going to do it. But I think we have a really urgent project of figuring out how we're going to revive this kind of democratic spirit and this commitment to open societies that made places like Toronto and Canada what they are. And I don't see how we do that if we don't begin with the library, because it doesn't get better than this.
I think a good portion of us sitting in this room would probably agree with that. I think you said private lives, and it reminded me of the moment in the book where the librarian says you have to work really hard to get kicked out.
Right.
And I appreciated that.
I can attest to that. Having spent a lot of time in libraries. You really have to work hard to get kicked out of a library.
Well, and it, to me, it made me think of how we witness moments, very private moments in public at a library. And that's the other part of it too, is that you witness someone having, a really difficult day, and you're coexisting with that even if you're not engaged with it. And it's one of the few places in our lives where a more kaleidoscopic range of emotions and experiences are side by side. And I think that privacy, you were talking about surveillance, but I also think just witnessing a broader spectrum of people's emotions and lived experiences, I think is such a beautiful part of this too.
So I'm glad you picked up on that. So two things I want to say about this. One is that, as you know, some of you might have seen this thing a couple years ago. There was an article in Forbes that came out, and this economist wrote that the library is obsolete as an institution. And he said, until you show me the cost-benefit analysis that identifies the public benefit from investing in libraries, I think we should knock them all down and replace them with Amazon stores. Okay? He literally wrote that, right? At first I thought
counting to three.
I thought it was like some friend of mine trolling me online because they knew I was writing this book, but it turned out it was real. And I think he was really expressing something that is in the zeitgeist of the moment, especially for very affluent communities. And I think this is an issue for libraries, that there are a lot of people who run the biggest businesses and have degrees from the fanciest universities. And they even run our big philanthropies, and they certainly are running our government in the United States today. And they are opting out of the public realm by using the marketplace.
Yeah.
And they're saying, I don't need to go to the library because I have Amazon.
Yeah.
I don't need a shared space because I have my country club, or I have Starbucks or something like that. And here's a way in which the kind of incredible ascent of the marketplace and of the market as the place that governs us and takes care of our needs actually hurts public institutions like the libraries, because what happens is, as elites stop coming to our shared places, as they build private infrastructures for themselves, right? And this carries into, by the way, the private airplanes and the Ubers and Lyfts and all these things. That was going to be my next question. As elites move out of this kind of shared public realm, they then both disparage what we have here and also make moves to try to pull support from it, right? Yeah. Show me the cost-benefit analysis, and if you can't, replace them with an Amazon store. And so one of the things that I wanted to do in the book is just document how vital and essential social infrastructure, shared gathering places, including libraries, are for the 99% of us.
Yeah.
And I really think that one of the problems we have right now in the way that we make allocations of resources is that too many of our thought leaders and elites don't recognize what happens in places like libraries every day.
Yeah.
And it really seems to me like it became an urgent project for me to tell the story of what you find when you walk into cities like Toronto and the branch libraries and the main libraries on a daily basis. And by the way, in terms of this Forbes story, just because I don't want to leave you on that, what happened after this Forbes article came out was kind of amazing. The librarians of the world united, and they got onto Twitter and they started posting these incredibly eloquent testimonies about the things that happen in libraries, like more early literacy than anywhere else, more English as a second language than any other public institution. In the U.S., more citizenship classes, companionship for older people, free Wi-Fi access. There are libraries in New York City that lend people outfits that they can wear to job interviews. The libraries in Berkeley lend out tools and seeds. It's an incredible set of things that happen in libraries, and they just started writing these things, one after the next, and they were so amazing that within 24 hours, Forbes took the article down. Yeah. They literally brought it down, right? Huh. And I've come to think of this like the only good thing that's ever happened on Twitter, right? But I got really excited. I got really carried away about my excitement. I was like, because I do think there's this thing happening in the world right now, and I'm sure you can relate to it, where on the one hand you wake up and you think, oh my God, we're doomed.
Yeah.
We have 12 years to reduce our carbon footprint, and we might not even have democracy. God knows what's going to happen. But then on the other hand, there's all this incredibly good stuff happening. This energy and enthusiasm and social movements that really are very promising. And so I don't know if can you relate to me at all on this? I can't tell. If you kind of go back and forth between these things. And I just started to get excited, and then I realized I should go through this thought experiment, and I want to ask you to do this thought experiment with me, because I think it's really useful to do. So imagine for a moment that there is no such thing as the library, right? Imagine that the library does not exist, okay? It's never been invented, and we are all sitting here today in an Amazon store, okay? Should I imagine that for a second? And I come to you from New York, and I've got this idea, and I pitch you the concept of the library, and you guys get really excited about it, and we decide that we're going to go to, Trudeau, and we're going to say, okay, we've got an idea for you, Prime Minister, and here's the pitch we're going to make to him together, okay? Now think about this as a thought experiment. We're going to say, okay, dreamboat Justin Trudeau, here's what we want you to do. We would like you to support with federal, with public resources, this thing called the library. Yeah. And we want you to build in every neighborhood of every city in Canada, and in every small town too, and suburb, we want you to build a library. And the library is going to be it's going to be a building, it's going to be kind of appropriately sized, like some of them are going to be giant and have, interior elevators and kinds of windy, cool staircases. But others are just going to be like modest little buildings that'll have a few rooms, depending on the size. And inside these libraries, we are going to have books and films and music and periodicals and arts and crafts, and, all of our shared cultural heritage, available.
Yeah.
And the libraries are going to be staffed by public employees, paid by the government with our taxpayer dollars. These are going to be magical people. We'll call them librarians. Their job is going to be to ask people how they can help and not to judge. And everybody's going to be welcome in these libraries. It doesn't matter what your social class is, what your race, what your ethnicity is. Doesn't even matter what your age. It doesn't matter if you're a citizen. One more thing, by the way, Mr. Trudeau. Everything in the library is going to be free.
Yeah.
You can just take them. And let's just use an honor system.
At that point, you might want to keep saying dreamboat, Trudeau.
We'll use an honor system to figure out, whether or not people are going to bring the stuff back. So imagine today we pitch that to Justin Trudeau and the library didn't exist. As much as you all love this guy, how many of you think that even Justin Trudeau would say, yeah, let's do that plan, right? That would be like one of the craziest ideas that would ever come out of this room, right? And it's completely radical, the concept of the library. And the crazy thing about this proposal is that we already have it, right? There's this completely radical and insane idea that's already real. And then we have to say, well, how is it real? Why did that happen?
Yeah.
And we even have it in the capitalist utopia of the United States of America, right? This library. And the reason why it happened is because, generations ago, we built up this idea of the public good.
Yeah.
And and it wasn't just an idea, it was a commitment. So we made a collective decision that we would invest our shared resources, like our tax dollars, would go to supporting these public goods that would be accessible and available to everyone. And we did it because we thought, we want to have good societies. And a good society means opportunity, it means decency, it means generosity to the people, right? Not just to the plutocrats. It means really using public resources for each other. And we pushed our elected leaders to do it, right? And we pushed our elected to do it. And so that's why we have this. And the question for us now is, what's the legacy that we're leaving to people who come next?
Yeah.
What are we doing to make sure that the libraries and institutions like this continue to exist and are better for generations to come? And I think that's a burning question that all of us need to be asking.
Well, and I'm going to sneak in one more question before we go out for only one or two audience questions. We're really sorry, we're limited on time, but in the spirit of getting better, we know that progress has blind spots. There's historic evidence of it, and even to use an example, today, in Toronto, we're huge advocates for something like laneway housing, where we turn garages into small homes or granny suites or additional opportunities to create density. In the way that we are developing it in Toronto, we're still figuring out how to not make those who own property just wealthier by being able to add a secondary suite to their site, and adding affordable housing caps to those sites to make sure they add to our affordability.
Right.
So in progressive efforts, we often have these blind spots that we trip over. And we know that the libraries are a sacred space, and so much of our social infrastructure is a sacred space, but most certainly we can do better. So as we sort of transition into the broader conversation with the audience, I'm wondering what's with you, what's still present with you when you think about blind spots and opportunities in our social infrastructure that we haven't yet addressed, and in this new paradigm, in the new era, as we continue to fight for these pieces of social infrastructure that really contribute to our lives.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's a hard question. And I guess I'll say two things. First is I went to Helsinki a few months ago because they built the world's great new library called the Uda Library, and you should look at photographs of it. It's like a floating spaceship, right by the train station. It's a gorgeous building, and it's so amazing to see all the things that they have there. Everything cutting edge and generous, and glass everywhere. You feel like you're floating. But for me, the most impressive thing in the whole library was the sign on the outside that listed the hours that the place was open. because the library is open at 8 a.m. and it closes at 10 p.m. every day. And on the weekends, it's open at like 9 a.m. and it closes at 9 p.m.
Wow.
And that's a story of access, right?
Yeah.
And so we actually have some really beautiful libraries in New York City that are beautifully designed,
Yeah.
and they're decently managed and well maintained, but they're closed too much of the time. So I think one of the things I'd really like to see us do with our social infrastructure is make sure that they're accessible.
Yeah.
I think access is one of the big issues of our time in general. And when we cut the budget for the library and don't pay librarians to work, it means that all of us suffer something. And so, Sundays in New York City used to be the busiest day for branch libraries because it's time for families to be together and to be with their neighbors. Now in New York City, almost every branch library is closed on Sunday. Same for late hours. And what that means is if you're a working person who works from 9 to 5, you don't really get a chance to use the library.
Yeah.
So I think that's one big thing. And I think the other thing I'll say is, it's not enough to just build a place that's accessible to people who feel like they can go anywhere. We really have to think about how racially divided and divided by class we have become, and to look for gathering places that will generate some kind of integration. And that's where programming can be very useful, right? Because sometimes it's not enough just to build a swimming pool. The story in my book about the US is like it took a lot of work to try to get people to come together from swimming pools, because for decades public swimming pools, which were great social infrastructure, were racially segregated by law.
Yeah.
Right? And if not by law, then by practice. So it's not, it's not enough just to build something. You have to make it work for everyone.
Yeah. Great.